Hello, my name is Tank of Nova, and welcome to my Cleric-Arbiter Powers tutorial. Most of what you're going to do with the Cleric-Arbiter is going to be built around the Scales of Judgment mechanic from the moment you get your Paragon at level 30. Because when you use any Radiant power, you get Burning Judgment, and when you use any Burning power, you get Radiant Judgment. And when you go from Radiant to Fire or vice versa, you use those charges to magnify your attack. That's why you see with my Lance of Faith, Radiant Judgment effect increases magnitude by 10, and that happens with every power. And I find that it's quite easy to accidentally mess up your own judgment gauge if your encounter and at-will powers are mixed up. So I find it really easy, really, to have at-wills be one type of power and encounters be the other type of power, instead of having Radiant and Burning mixed up in both. So there's like no chance of accidentally going through your gauge when you don't want to. Which is why you see I'm using Scattering Light and Lance of Faith, both being Radiant powers. And that's also why I'm using Searing Javelin, we'll get to that later, and Forge Master's Flame, which are both fire powers, and Divine Glow, which is just a threat cutter and Divinity Regen device, and something else that we'll get to later. And my daily powers being Guardian of the Faith and Celestial Prominence, both being Radiant, meaning they're charged by me using my encounter powers. Which I decided to go through that because of Sudden Verdict, the third feat you can select at level 59. So I don't have to use 6 encounter powers to have a fully charged daily. Now, I have seen some builds for the Devout Cleric where the Angel of Life is not used, but instead the other one. I actually like Angel of Life and Angel of Death for both Paragons. Mainly because perfect balance is a word soup that contradicts itself into utter uselessness, but I'm not going to get to that because I don't use the thing. So, the Piercing Javelin versus Light Speed. The Light Speed feat that you can select at level 41 has you using the Searing Javelin, which is what I use already, and it boosts the Daunting Light. Daunting Light and Searing Javelin are different types of powers. One's Radiant, the other's Fire. So Piercing Javelin for me was a no-brainer. Not to mention having a guaranteed crit on an attack that's a line-based AoE turns the Searing Javelin into a hand cannon. It was a no-brainer pick in that one. Tipping Scales. Divine Glow generates a full stack of either judgment so long as you have at least one. Which is very easy because you can just use an at will, then use Divine Glow, and now you have a fully charged gauge to use either Searing Javelin, Forge Master's Flame. And a fully charged Forge Master's Flame hits almost as hard as a daily power. Because you see how Burning Judgment increases the magnitude by 100? That is per stack. And you can have up to 6 of them. 1250. That's higher than my daily. That's higher than, well, that's almost as high as my Guardian of Faith. It's like you're using a daily power when you use Tipping Scales, or just charging it manually. This just makes it faster. Sudden Verdict. Another instant judgment gauge fill. Encounter powers which generate Radiant or Burning Judgment now have a quarter chance to instantly fill the gauge. Now it's only for encounter powers that use divinity. So, wait, encounter which generate the only powers that generate the judgment are ones that use the energy gauge that you have called divinity. So divine glow is not part of that. Searing javelin and forge master's flame count towards sudden verdict, which instantly fills my judgment gauge. For this build, radiant judgment gets maxed out immediately, which allows me to have a fully powered lance of faith or scatter light, or I could simply just use those charges to refill my divinity, as shown by scales of judgment. Using Channel Divinity will empty the judgment gauge, restoring additional divinity, making sudden verdict a way for you to be able to fight for long periods of time, as opposed to inner balance. Actually, I don't remember why I didn't choose this. Increased divinity be restored when Channel Divinity consumes radiant or burning. Oh yeah, I didn't choose it because I don't want to force myself to have certain stats. That's why I went for sudden verdict. Critical Sun. I actually don't use my dailies that often, but when I do, Critical Sun is hilariously broken. It basically allows you to use a daily power twice. The Celestial Prominence. Whenever Celestial Prominence deals critical damage, you may cast Celestial Prominence again. So you're essentially double casting a daily, which is absolutely ridiculous. Really comes in a pinch when you're dealing with a large mob of semi-weak enemies, because Celestial Prominence is an AoE explosion type daily. So you're not really going to use it on giant bosses. That would be what the other daily is, Guardian of Faith. An Angel of Death. It may take 26 stacks in order for you to be able to spam your dailies infinitely for 12 seconds. But for those 12 seconds, you just destroy anything in your path. You want to spam Searing Javelin because there's a bunch of mobs? Well, those mobs are gone. Are you dealing with a giant boss? Just spam the ever-living crap out of Forge Master's Flame. Even when it's not charged by the judgment gauge, you are still casting a hard-hitting spell repeatedly without cost. Again, a no-brainer. Just like Piercing Javelin and Tipping Scales. Light of the Scales basically allows you to stay in the fight longer, because when you consume your judgment gauge for power, you get more. And the closer you are to half your divinity with divine equilibrium, you just do more damage in an arbiter's DPS. So instant use of this the moment you get to the level required to use it. That'll be all. Thank you for coming to my tutorial. Bye bye.